I am so conservative.
Rationalized in my head. These are things I read in
And
the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
Remembered
invited.
at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah.
I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. And it is true, I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. And I do have to mention that, I think, at the top of each program, because in cancel culture, which is where we're at, people are so easily offended that they will cancel you once they realize they are hearing an idea that has not been approved by liberalism. And I'm definitely not one of the approved within liberalism. So this is your trigger warning. You're going to be potentially exposed to ideas that will challenge your thinking and worldview. I really am so theologically conservative that I can't turn left even when I'm driving, but I do want to believe what is true, and I'm willing to challenge my ideas. So if you're easily offended, this is clearly not a safe space for you. Today is March 30, 2020, 2020. That's a lot of 20s. And this is broadcast number 233. Today, our friend, I think he's our friend, or at least he's friendly,
You're hoping he's
author and editor, Dr. David Marshal, joins us to talk about a soon-to-be-released book, The Third Education Revolution, which he co-edited with Vishal Mangalwadi. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher, co-host, and still Time Magazine's 2006 Person of the Year, Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie, baby.
There it is. There was the issue of Time that declared me the 2006 Person of the Year. I was just a little late for the photographer, so I had to splice it in myself. And of course, as I explained, I have turned over the control of the information age to Bezos, Dorsey, and Zuckerberg. So they're handling that now. I am no longer in control of the information age. Our sponsors. I got to say this. If I don't, the rest of the program will fail miserably. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for today's Unknown Webcast is World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet. And our disclaimer, our regular legal disclaimer, that our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, Dr. David Marshal, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the Webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, or smart remarks, or anything else that might fall into the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content, this straight from our invincible law firm, Dewey, Teagan, and Howe. They've never lost a case. I can verify that. I can vouch for that. They have never lost a case. Notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy them, if you enjoy this webcast, to ensure your continued access to this program, or if you hate it, either way, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. The last time Dr. Marshall was here, I probably said, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. But hey, we're ever expanding.
We're ever
We're
expanding,
moving
ever.
out into all
Now,
kinds of new.
you must, Ron, you must have a new microphone set up there because you're
Yeah.
kind of quieter than normal. I don't know if you can turn that up or not.
I will give it a shot. Hold on a second.
Yes, you know what? We can use the word "shot" on this program because we're conservative, so we're fine.
You can turn me up because I don't see a control
I,
from here.
I can't.
Okay.
Sorry,
I'll keep looking.
but I want to share this screenshot here so people know what it is that we're actually talking about. It's a new book, The Third Education Revolution. David Marshall and Vishal Mangalwadi are co-editors. Mangalwadi are co-editors of the book, and I am recommending it. I've started reading it. This is something that has been on my mind for a long time. As Ron, as you know, we've written on the Marxification, let's say, of our public schools since around the
I think I
1930s.
was reading John Murray this couple of weeks ago, and I came across the word jollification. It's like I thought, okay. In the meantime, you have Marxification. Am I any louder now? I just moved my mic closer to my mouth.
Yes, that's a little better.
Okay.
Well, and David, we've had him on. He's talked about it because, and he has. I really like his perspective because he's lived in other countries, so he can kind of speak to the issues of critical race theory and education and those kinds of things from a larger knowledge base, let's say.
Let's say actually more direct. Did you live in Japan, Dave?
Live in Japan, Taiwan, mainland China, Hong Kong when it was a British colony, actually.
Whoa.
And England when it was a British colony, too.
It must really amuse you when people tell you what it's like over there. They've never been there, but you have.
It irritates me, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
No, I was just reading online yesterday. Someone was telling us about how he and his girlfriend had flown up to Xinjiang, the province, the northwest province, and driven around in a car around the capital of Urumqi, and how he had not encountered any oppression of the Uyghur people up there, and he just figured that was pretty much a Western fraud. And I thought, well, wow, you drove around in a car for a few hours in the part of Xinjiang that is not actually Uyghur. Oh, wow. And Auschwitz wasn't taking any tourists that day, were they?
No. And remember, was it Yuri Gagarin who went up into space, did a spacewalk and said, "I see no God up here"?
Pretty close parallel.
Yeah. So maybe you're not looking far enough. So what are we talking about, Don?
Well, we're talking about education, and we've done a few webcasts on this. We've had Alex Newman on here a few times. This is kind of a new area to talk to David about, but I like it. I'm concerned and have been concerned for a long time that the public school system has become largely an indoctrination center for creating new social views, cultural social views, and has become less and less a place of teaching the basic, like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And now with critical race theory saying, okay, even things like math are white, so we need to spend less time on that. And we have public schools, I don't know how many states are doing this, but Illinois is one of them that has implemented critical race theory into its curriculum starting 2 weeks ago. So, how, as Christians,
it's funny you should mention this because it was just. I can actually show this. Let me put it on a screen here. George Will, did you see his opinion column on that?
Did not, no.
February 5th, so it's over a month old. Let me do a share screen on that. Remember I told you I was listening to a podcast on trends in Christian education, and it came from your state of Illinois, which used to be mine. and they mentioned this article, opinion, the worst government state now turns to indoctrination. And this is really an excellent opinion piece by Will. Imposing uniformity of thought is the Board of Education's agenda for culturally responsive teaching and leading, CRTL. It builds upon Illinois' 2015 law requiring teachers to implement action civics, which means leading their pupils in activism on behalf of various causes. You know, that's what you're paying those taxes for, right? To turn your children in Illinois into little political activists, right? That's
right.
That's what it's all about, right? Up
Right.
here, the original law, or the original draft of this legislation actually mandated the teaching of, I don't know if it's there or later, mandated the teaching of progressive politics or
Yes.
progressive ideas.
Yes.
And they changed the word from progressive to inclusive. But of course, the agenda did not change at all. It's still the same. But if you, I don't know why I'm able to access, because I don't have a subscription to WashPo, but apparently you might be able to read this. It's an excellent piece. I just read snippets of it and heard it quoted online this morning.
So that is the problem. And I think, and especially in light of, we just saw statistics that came out real recently, that even church attendance has dropped to under 50%. I'm not surprised by that.
It was that high.
Yeah, I'm surprised it was that high as well. So to David, now that we've kind of done this preliminary, here's what the problem is. You and Vishal and how many, 29 others have compiled, let's say, a roadmap on how churches can reclaim education. Why did you do that? And have we missed the mark on what we think we're seeing?
Well, let me give you a little background, first of all. Who is Vishal Mangalwadi? Maybe some of your listeners don't know who he is. Vishal is an Indian philosopher and reformer who has written a ton of books. He is very interested in how to change society and how the church ought to be at the forefront of changing society. His first book that I read was actually called The World of the Gurus, and delved into some of the gurus in India and their approach to life, and then contrasting them with Jesus Christ. Others of his books have dealt with the impact of missions on India and how Christian missionaries came to India and radically transformed it. But his interest is global, and the people who are contributing to this volume are also from around the world. So you mentioned 29. I haven't really counted how many people were contributing. I just took the chapters, came in, and I got my pen out and started making marks. But there are contributors on all 6 inhabited continents. I don't think there's any contributors from Antarctica.
Wow.
But
well, I would hope you would get one for the next edition, for the next volume. But
one would hope so. But Antarctica is pretty much a white continent, so I think we probably should write that one off as a lost cause.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have contributors from Indonesia, India, Australia, Germany, and the problem is not just American, but it is very much an American problem as well. And I think most of your listeners know very well what that problem is by now. Yeah. I don't think I have to convince them, and I don't think you need to convince most of your listeners that there is a deep problem in American education right now. Now, my own perspective, I'm a teacher. I helped found a international American school in China, and also helped found a program for doing research at the top high school in Shandong province. I've taught in universities, and I've also substitute taught in American schools.
Must have been a contrast there.
Yes, but all the kids, there's good kids and there's good teachers in all those systems. And I don't want to say anything negative about the teachers in general. I mean, they tend to lean left. That's true. But But in my experience, most of the teachers in the American public school system are working hard.
Yes.
And, most of them care about doing a good job and helping their kids, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
But this, and to set a little bit more of the stage, I'm living in the outskirts of Seattle. We're not in the city of Seattle. We're not even in the suburbs. We're out kind of towards the more rural districts. So the area around us is a little more conservative than it would be in the city of Seattle. And yet the schools have never been very well. Let me give you an example of what a lot of people are dealing with even before this woke revolution. And this is something that Christians should be very concerned about, something Christians should be on the forefront of trying to challenge and change, not only for the sake of our children, but for the sake of our country and for the sake of the truth.
Right.
I came into some classrooms just about a half a mile from my home and sat down, and I went to another school in the district, and on the wall I noticed some biographies written in pencil. So I went over and looked at them. I was subbing in that classroom, and they were of the Prophet Muhammad. So I started reading them, and I was quite amazed at how wonderful the Prophet Muhammad turned out to be.
Wow.
None of the little biographies of the Prophet Muhammad had anything negative to say about him at all. In fact, some of them very directly, seemed that they were, Muhammad was the prophet of God and things like that. Is this really something? I've never seen anything like this about Buddha or about Jesus on the walls of a public school before. A few weeks later, I went to the school near my house, and I found what I think was a source of those little biographies, little mini biographies, is a book called History Alive. History Alive is a textbook for middle school children, and I think also for high school children. And it's supposed to give a world history. And I opened it up during breaks, and I started looking through the world. I blogged on this at one point, and gave a lot of quotes from the book. There was an entire chapter on the life of Muhammad, a whole chapter on Muhammad, and there was not one single word in that chapter that was in any way critical of him. Everything it said about Muhammad made him sound like he was a font of virtues. Everything it said about Islam was entirely positive. He was such a kind man to women. He was on and on it went.
The child bride he married?
Didn't mention her. No, Aisha. Didn't mention her. Didn't mention his habit of starting wars with neighboring tribes. It didn't mention his habit of enslaving those that he conquered. It didn't mention the 30 wives that he had or so.
And by the way, I think we need to make it clear to our audience that Muslims know all this. They know it, and they have no problem with it. Okay, this is they understand everything that Dr. Marshall is saying, and it's fine with them. Okay, please go.
I had a few problems with this. First of all, this is a public school system, and the public schools are not supposed to, according to the Constitution, to be preaching one particular religion.
Absolutely.
Secondly, most of the kids are more likely to be from a Christian background than from a Muslim background in that district. Very few Muslims. Although my son actually had a good friend who from Pakistan in the high school there.
You'll find him, yeah.
And thirdly, was the sheer historical inaccuracy of what the book was saying. I'm an historian and I know the facts. I've read a lot about Muhammad's life.
Right.
And there was nothing in there that was credible historically. It just wasn't true. The other thing was
education. What do we call it when it's not education, but it's feeding you a narrative?
Indoctrination.
Yeah. That's the. Go ahead. Thank you. Just needed to remember that.
So I looked, of course, to see what the textbook said about the life of Jesus of Nazareth, and it said, instead of a whole chapter, it had about 2 sentences, and it said that Christians believe that he died and he rose again. That was about all it said. But the rest of the book had a lot to say about Christianity. And whereas everything in the book about Muhammad and Islam was entirely positive. Everything in the book about Christianity was entirely negative. Christianity was a roadblock to civilization, according to this textbook. It was from the church that Western civilization managed to escape.
Did you write down the name of this textbook?
It's called History Alive.
Oh, I'm going to definitely get me a copy of that. Yeah.
So this is one little snippet, one little glimpse. And I'm not going to say this is something that is taught everywhere in the American school systems, because Washington State is more liberal than most.
Yeah, when you said that in the surrounding areas of Seattle that they're a little bit less, a little bit more conservative than the city, did you mean that they put like Karl Marx posters on their walls in their houses? What does that mean? What does it mean to be a little bit more conservative than?
Well, actually, to tell you the truth, back in 2016, when I did a speaking tour for my book, Jesus is No Myth, I traveled around the United States. And after I left Seattle, I didn't see a single Hillary Clinton sign until I got to Ohio.
Yeah. Yeah.
No Karl Marx signs either.
Okay.
Right. That reminds me, my daughter and her family took a short vacation in the last presidential election cycle. And she called when she got to Tennessee where they were going. She said, I am completely shocked because I see Trump posters everywhere. And even the news seems to be more friendly toward him than I'm seeing when I'm in Chicago. So it's kind of interesting how different areas of the country, their biases are more widely seen.
The first sign I saw that some people might not like Donald Trump at the time was upper Minnesota or Michigan or Wisconsin or someplace like that, where I saw this huge bear, a statue of a bear by the side of the road. It was like 15 feet high. And on the side of it, someone had spray painted Trump, and then somebody else had crossed out the T. So I don't know what that means exactly.
It means they're artistically inclined. How about that?
Yeah. So anyway,
editorial. Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, aside from that one little glimpse, I think you can see the revolution that occurred in 2020 has had a very important educational component. I mean, if you go back to the Occupy Wall Street, for example.
Now they're going back in time.
Yeah. Some sociologists, I think at New York University, did a survey of the people who were participating in the Occupy Wall Street, and they found that New York City, about 8% of the people were involved in education. About 20% of the Occupy Wall Street people were involved in education. Right. So there was already a pretty strong link between radical politics and public education. But when it comes to a place like, let me go a little further north now and look at a very interesting link that I point out in this book between really radical politics and, well, Howard Zinn. Let's go to Howard Zinn.
Oh, yeah.
Howard Zinn was a World War II veteran. He seemed to have fought, honorably in World War II. He returned to the United States and he took his PhD in history at Columbia University. He looked around for a job and he went to a Black Christian school in Atlanta called Spelman College, where he was invited to teach. And he began to realize that the best way, because he was a Marxist and probably a Communist Party member, he began to realize that the best way to indoctrinate or to win Americans, especially Black Americans, over to the side of a Marxist perspective was through race and racial identity politics. And that was a fairly common insight, I think, among Marxists, even at that time.
What year would we be talking? Right after World War II?
I think it's probably in the 50s. I'm not exactly sure of the date.
Okay.
But he ended up going to Boston. Let's see. I think he was at Boston College. I'm not quite sure which university he was at.
Very conservative.
And Methodist, I think.
Oh, I thought it was Catholic. Oh, I'm thinking of Boston. I thought Boston College was Catholic. No?
I think it was Methodist,
Okay.
but anyway, I could be wrong.
I don't know.
Seattle University is Catholic. That's
I
true.
really don't know. I obviously don't know.
But there's an interesting link between Howard Zinn and the Boston bombers, which
Okay.
is, if we're talking about activism now, you were talking
yeah.
earlier about activism in the school. Now,
Things
the Boston
belong,
bombers
they're
were very active activists. Yes,
Yes.
they were. Howard Zinn taught in Boston, and one of his neighbors was a guy named Larry Aronson, one of his friends. Larry Aronson was teaching at a school just a few minutes walk from Harvard University at a high school. And Larry Aronson decided to take this radical perspective that Zinn was using, which is, if your listeners are familiar with Howard Zinn, he's the author of A People's History of the United States.
Oh, that's that Howard Zinn. That's right.
Right. Which is basically a very, I'm not going to say that it's entirely wrong, because my perspective is woke politics, Marxism, are kind of a heresy on Christianity. The insight that we should care about people who are on the margins is something that we as Christians should recognize is really coming from the gospel. The ancient world didn't care about people who were nobodies.
Right.
If you read the ancient Roman historian Suetonius and his history of the Roman emperors, he talks about 12 emperors, and he talks about one of them as, very nice guy who would put on a lot of games for the people. And those games, of course, were where you get to watch. It was basically a big snuff film.
Britain
Right.
services.
Live and in person. Right.
Live, watching people kill one another for the entertainment of the audience. Now, in the modern terms, we would think that was pretty sick, but in those days they thought, here's this emperor, he's so nice, he puts on these games for everybody, and then he sits close down to the field so he can get some of the blood splatter on him. That's the way the ancient Romans and the Greeks, to a lesser extent, I think, thought about the people on the margins. They were exploitable.
Your point is really important, I think, for those who are going to see this, who are unfamiliar with history that's farther back than 18 minutes ago. I think most people don't have it. Alvin Schmidt did a book a few years ago, Under the Influence, How Christianity Transformed Civilization, where he deals with what civilization was like in the first century and how it became Western culture over the next 300 years because of Christianity and Christian thought. More recently, an atheist, Tom Holland, came out with Dominion, who argues fundamentally the same thing. So this is not a bias by Christians about history. It is an accounting of history by both Christians and atheists who are familiar with all of these issues, going, we wouldn't have Western culture if it weren't for the church, which is fundamentally what you're saying.
We wouldn't have emphasis on compassion. We wouldn't have, it was not a value to be humble, to be, when Jesus said, blessed are the meek, that was like totally countercultural, even to a degree in Jewish society in the first century.
Right.
So yeah, but definitely in pagan society, absolutely.
So
I think
go ahead.
I think the Chinese had a little bit better idea of this than we're a little closer to the gospel in this regard. Even this word back here on the wall reflects some of the Chinese attitude that was a little bit more healthy than the Roman attitude was. But the Chinese were good at torturing people too. I don't want to.
They didn't have a big education on that. We heard about this water torture thing.
So going back to Howard Zinn, I'm not saying that Howard Zinn was wrong about everything. In fact, a Christian heresy is something that is part of the truth that's taken out of context.
Right.
So Howard Zinn had some insights, and of course, looking out for people who are on the margins, people who are poor, people who are maybe fat or disabled or have some other problems like that is very central to the gospel. But there's something more central than that, and that is, first of all, justice. And secondly, the whole panoply of Christian values, which wrenched out of their context, become, when a god becomes, when a value becomes a god, then it becomes a demon, as C.S. Lewis was fond of saying. So what Zen did was he wrenched morality over to he focused it on one particular moral value, and he radicalized students through this book, which has sold millions of copies, and then began to be used in the public education system. One of the people who used that book was a man by the name of Larry Aronson, who was the history teacher and the social science teacher at a school a few minutes walk from Harvard University. Aronson was also a friend of a couple of Chechen refugees, immigrants,
Really?
who also lived quite nearby. And he was also a friend of one famous movie star by the name of Matt Damon.
Okay.
I believe he taught Matt Damon's older brother, Kyle. I'm not sure, but they certainly knew each other well.
The Matt Damon who said that if George W. Bush ever walked into a public school, he'd eat his shoe. And then when everybody pointed out to him that that's exactly where George Bush was on 9/11, he was in a public school. He didn't eat his shoe. So, okay, let's go on.
Yeah. So Matt Damon, if you watch the movie Good Will Hunting, which I think is a great movie.
It's a great movie. Yeah.
It is. And at one point he says, you need to read Howard Zinn. He'll knock you on your ass, is the way he put it.
Yeah.
And Matt Damon was giving a plug for his friend in that case. So Howard Zinn, Larry Aronson bragged about how during those years he had radicalized the student body of that school, and how hundreds of people, former students, had gotten jobs in social justice areas. He also mentioned his friend. I don't remember his name. It's a Chechen name. I couldn't pronounce it if I did know it. But the older brother, who was the older of the two Boston bombers, who led his younger brother, in this crime spree, that killed many lives and maimed lots of other people during the Boston Marathon. And it's hard, I can't prove it, but it's hard not to believe that going to a school where people are taught to have contempt for American history and to see Western civilization as basically oppressive, how that could not have an effect on young immigrants who basically, when they came to the United States, they were treated very nicely. I mean, they went to this nice preppy school that apparently they got along with the other students. The other students were nice to them. And yet somehow they gained some sort of a very radical and hateful image of America. They say, of course, because of the American invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. But whatever happened in that school, it wasn't something that toned that down in any way or helped them to see the positive side of American history.
No.
Right. Well, so we also want to move to the university, because what you're saying influences and goes farther than most may realize. In 2016, Washington Times ran a story pointing out that at that time, the ratio between conservative and liberal academic professors was 12-1, 12 liberals to each one conservative. So they're getting a particular kind of a political view. Now, what that does, though, is it creates a dilemma. When those students are coming home for holidays, how are they going to survive in what really is a cancel culture? And one of our sponsors speaks to that.
Well, they're in the cancel culture. They're trying to figure out how to survive in the non-cancel culture. And our friends at World's End Theology Outlet, they kind of bring this problem to the fore. So after 4 semesters at your small progressive liberal arts college, you're flying home to visit your red state relatives. You remember to bring your emotional support puppies. You've packed all your comfort blankets and pillows. You even remembered your adult coloring books, but it still feels like something is missing. You don't feel safe. What can you do? You need instant safe space. It has patented anti-free speech technology to make you feel protected. That protection includes guaranteed protection from, I'm going a little slow here, I'm clicking these things, trigger words, microaggressions, cognitive dissonance, and unwelcome thoughts. You need to feel protected, feel safe. In order to do that, get instant safe space from World's End Theology Outlet. You have your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. So, instant safe space, I can't speak highly enough about it. If you
So
really just want to stop free speech, get it.
that's what you want to get.
I threaten
So-
free speech.
So one of the things that we have observed over the last year with the advent of COVID and the pandemic, however you feel that it has been handled, I mean, is it really to the massive degree of killer death as I don't know 1919 flu, or is it become more politicized? Almost is beside the point. What it has done is it has stopped education or slowed it down significantly, which may be a good thing in terms of what we're talking about, rather than being indoctrination, and at the same time increased homeschooling. Now, your book is advocating homeschooling. Would I be correct in that?
Well, it advocates something that is related to homeschooling, I should say. It advocates that the church take control of education, basically.
Okay.
And that would be both at the younger levels and also at the college level.
Right, because it's one of the chapters is homeschool to church college, or I have to look.
That's
at
a subtitle of the book, yes.
Subtitle, right? Well, that's actually one of the chapters, I believe, chapter 4 maybe or something, which I read. I like that, and I also like Vishal's treatment in the first chapter on here's how education fundamentally shaped Western culture, but America for sure. And we have missed that. Now, our nation is currently, as you're aware, engaged in trying to divest itself of any visible connections to the past. Why is that important in a sort of a Marxist movement culture? Why is that important?
Well, why is it important? We are hungry ghosts, as Thich Nhat Hanh put it. Our young people being cut off from their past. In the Soviet Union and in China, of course, Marxism did the same thing. It divested us of our own past. The Cultural Revolution was a great example of that. They warred against the four olds, which I guess we're three of the olds, but also took on another one of them. Cancel culture is just an expression of that Marxist tendency to. Now, you could go back, actually, if you want to go back to ancient history, you could go back to the life of the story of Prometheus, told by Aeschylus in one of the Greek plays. Prometheus was a Titan who rebelled against Zeus, and Zeus said, "Don't bless human beings." And Prometheus said, "No, I'm going to help these guys anyway, whatever you say." Zeus retaliated by having him chained to someplace in Georgia or someplace in the Caucasus Mountains, and having an eagle come and pick his liver every day. That was kind of a picture of how Aeschylus maybe saw the supreme deity Zeus. Well, there was a poet, an English poet by the name of Percy Shelley, who wrote Prometheus Unbound, which influenced Karl Marx very deeply. Karl Marx saw himself as trying to help, Prometheus to escape from these chains, like Hercules would in the ancient story. But in the old story, in the old version, Prometheus reconciles apparently with Zeus. But in the new version, what Prometheus does and what the communist revolution does is it overthrows the authority of heaven, overthrows God. And so in the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels say communism abolishes all eternal truths, all morality, and all religion, basically. That's kind of the Promethean attitude about society, is that everything old needs to be abolished. We need to set up this brand new structure. I don't want to speak for all people who are involved in the critical race theory or whatnot. I don't think I can. But it's not so much now that all of ancient civilization, it's all of ancient civilization needs to be abolished, but really it's Western civilization needs to be abolished.
Yeah.
For example, you would find that there was an article in the National Review a few days ago written about Christopher Rufus at the Discovery Institute, saying that in California they've approved a curriculum in which the children are going to be singing praises to some of the Aztec gods.
Correct, right.
So that's not necessarily abolishing everything of the past. If you're going to be worshiping gods who in the past, were being...
Are they trying to justify that as some kind of cultural diversity thing, or what?
Cultural diversity, anything that's Western
is evil.
Is evil. Yeah, that seems to be the perspective of a lot of these people. But maybe some people are just looking for balance. I don't know.
He is not. As you read what he's saying, what he's claiming is that Western culture, Christianity specifically, committed theocide. And killed the gods of the Aztecs, who were, they were, human sacrifice was just part of their culture, not a really big deal.
Well,
why would we get so upset about it? So what we need to do is to commit theocide, return the favor against Christianity, and reintroduce the pagan rituals.
This is where the profound ignorance comes in of history. Bernal Diaz was there with I forget the conquistador who went into the Aztec kingdom, and you can read in the Conquest of New Spain. This is written in the 16th century. You can read the dialogues they had comparing Christianity. These were conversations had between Spaniards and Aztecs about their different religions, and the Aztecs were committing human sacrifice.
Right.
So do you want to go? You really want to go back to that? Do you really
want
to
some of it was
condemn the people who stopped the human sacrifice, because that's what you're doing.
Right. Someone mentioned a few minutes ago the question of how this relates to higher education.
Right.
And this is something that interests me quite a bit. I went to the University of Washington for my BA and my MA, and that was basically in the same quad, the liberal arts quad, where Robin DiAngelo got her PhD.
Yeah.
Robin DiAngelo is a figure who probably influenced the present movement even more than anybody else. So you look on Amazon, she's got like 15,000 Amazon reviews on Amazon. She's got millions and millions of copies. You can hear about her everywhere. In the same quad, I visited a history professor who happened to be Catholic and talked to him about this several years ago. And he said, basically what happened was the liberals, you were just talking about the liberal professors were very open-minded, and they thought, well, we need a balance among the faculty. So let's bring in some of the really radical feminists, some of the Marxists and whatnot, and we'll balance out the faculty with these new perspectives. But then when they brought in the new faculty wasn't necessarily quite so open-minded. And the thinking kind of ratcheted it up. It didn't ratchet down. It only ratcheted one direction. So that a year or so ago, my old professor, who was an anthropology professor at the same university, sent me his speech his retirement speech. And this professor, you have to understand, is not a man of the right. He's not even a man of the center. He's very much a leftist. He's very friendly to Marxism. He's not a Marxist, but he considered Marx to be a very important thinker. I consider Marx very well. I won't say what I consider Marx. I don't like him very much. I don't like Karl Marx.
If it's preferable, go ahead and say it.
I'm very open. I'm very open to the theory that he was a worshiper of the evil one. Let me put it that way. There are serious people who maintain that, and
that's true. But he was arguably an important figure.
He was an important figure, and my professor seems to like Marx. He would say something good about Mao Zedong a long time before he would say something good about, say, Ronald Reagan, for example.
Okay.
Anyway, so you have to know who this guy was. He's a guy who worked in a communist country regularly. He's a man of the left. He was an atheist. But when he retired, in his retirement speech, he said, I think this radical political stuff is ruining my field. So even he thought that it was going too far. Now that's at a major university on the West Coast, one of the top research universities in the United States.
But he knew what happened in the Cultural Revolution, right?
Oh, he knew very well what happened in the Cultural Revolution.
It's kind of like, Alan Greenspan, okay? He knew what happened in all the previous economic crashes where people got greedy. But he said before the Senate, I just didn't realize that people would act against the interests of the market just for to cater to their own self-interest. I thought they would realize that the interests of the market are their interests as well, and that would overcome their greed. But of course, the same thing that always happened again under Greenspan. We had this huge crash. Well, if you think that Mao Zedong is a good guy, and yet you know what happened under the Cultural Revolution, but you're promoting him, don't be surprised.
Well, I want to be fair to my teacher. He was a very good teacher, and when I would argue for Christianity in different contexts, he'd be fair about it.
He let you talk, and he would say that is a view.
So he would be more what I would call a classic liberal,
right? In
yes,
terms of how he allowed the discussion to proceed.
Yes, and I'm sure that there are many professors, and even in fields like sociology, maybe not so much sociology, but in some of those more radical fields that are very professional and really care about their students, care about the things that they're studying. But in general, higher education in the liberal arts has really taken a body blow over the last few decades. And
you can't say that they're shutting us down because they're afraid we're going to shut them down, because in 50 years we never did it. The education system never did it, but they're shutting us down because that's their agenda, to shut us down.
Right. And so, we can do a lot of hand wringing about this. And I'm a conservative politically, but I think that we need to find ways of looking at this in a positive way and look at what we can do about it. And that's what Vishal is trying, his team is trying to do.
Right. Well, and I think it's really important. Now, Le Regeneres pointed out something that I think is probably going to be true. It's only a question of time before politicians come after homeschooling. I suspect that is likely true.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't mean that we can't continue it, because we don't necessarily need to have government approval to train up our children. I don't. Maybe I'm missing something, and you two are theologians as well.
As a former teacher too, I will tell you this, and that
before you do that, before we go to a former teacher, although that is important, what about just as believers who are parents? Isn't it biblically mandated that we pass on the faith and history and education of our children, regardless of what government we're living under?
And that's in the book of Deuteronomy. Teach your children when you're walking by the road, when you're sitting down, all that stuff. I'm just saying, most Christian families don't take that seriously. They want they've become like the culture. They want to put their children somewhere where somebody else is going to do it for them. They'd rather pay somebody else to do it. And in so many cases, the default option is the public school system because of monetary constraints and so on.
So, as you both know, I'm very kind of involved with several heresies that are racing through the church simultaneously: critical race theory / intersectionality, the Enneagram, and the theology of panentheism, that God is bigger than the universe, but the universe is Christ, the first incarnation of the Christ. 50% of those in the U.S. are not attending church. I think all of those things are connected. So how is what you're proposing or working with Vishal on and these other scholars, how is that going to work within churches that seem to not even understand things like that the resurrection was physical?
Well, I don't think that heretical churches are going to be much help on anything, to be honest.
Nope.
But to be clear, your questioner, what was the person who asked the question?
That was Don.
Well,
No.
That was Le Regeneres. Yeah.
Okay. The proposal is not just to work through homeschooling.
There it is.
Yeah. So our plan is to go from homeschooling to work with churches that are, able to do this. I mean, not every single church is going to be able to do this, of course, but to set up a schooling system within the churches, run by academic principals, and then using that, kind of a blended learning model, which means you have people there. The problem with this COVID-19 online learning is there's nobody there to help the students, and it gets kind of boring trying to interact with the screen all the time. So the idea is to have people there who are helping the students to learn, but also to get some of the best resources possible, the best resources in the world online, so that they can learn online and also learn through their academic principal and people who come into the church.
Right. So you have something that's called an academic pastor. Now, that's not necessarily the senior pastor of the church, but someone that is recognized with at least pastoral gifts, what you're an administrator, whatever, however you want to term it, but someone who's biblically sound and can handle the academics of guiding and teaching within a church setting.
That is part of the proposal. And let me explain my own role in this, so I don't
it's important,
mislead anybody. After COVID-19, basically I was out of a job, which I was teaching in China. I came back to the United States the same day as the first COVID patient to SeaTac Airport.
I knew there was a connection.
There was, I don't know if you're sitting next to me or what, but
good thing we have internet between us here.
Yes, well, I'm just fine. I was planning to come back for a couple weeks, and COVID happened, and I ended up staying in the United States. So I wrote my book, Letter to a Racist Nation, when everything was going crazy last summer. And then after that, I did some other writing projects that I needed to catch up on. Vishal has been working on this for many years, and we've known each other for quite a while. And so he asked me to, and he also knew that I had, a background in education and in apologetics. So he asked me to co-edit this book with him. Basically, the network of contributors are people that he has come to know over the last, 15 years or whatever it is. So I guess you're going to be speaking with him sometime. He can probably answer some of the questions in more detail.
Yeah, I definitely want to get him on, because I think, to me, this is one of the pressing issues of the day for the church.
Right. So I can answer some questions, but I can't necessarily answer them all as well. But there's a lot of different aspects to this proposal. And as the first editor, the person who brought the manuscripts and made them readable, some of them were written by people who didn't, necessarily speak English as their first language.
Right.
It was quite fascinating to me. The whole program, it's very, I think, pretty well thought out program about how the church and how Christians can, bring education back, revive it, and really revive Western civilization, world civilization, through education. One of the chapters that I wrote was a comparison of three great educators, Confucius, Plato, and Jesus Christ. And my thesis was that people like that, a teacher, can really provide the foundation of a civilization, that the whole who we are and what we've become is built to a large extent upon great teachers like that. Mm-hmm. So who we are now, what we will become, the world, the Howard Zinns of this world, the Larry Aronsons of this world, the Ibram Kendis and Robin DiAngelos of this world, they seem to have the education system in their hands right now. They seem to have, control over the minds of our children when they go off to school.
Right.
And that is not the way it should be. Because, first of all, they're wrong about so many things. And secondly, because it's a very narrow worldview. I think a strong worldview, and this is part of the third revolution that I really like, is the idea of relying on the great books for education.
Right.
Going back to some of the greatest works in human history that have formed and educated and taught civilization and helped it to grow. Going back to the ancient Greeks, Romans, the Jews, of course, and reading those books for yourself, getting to know what the great thinkers, meeting those people, meeting Plato and Aristotle and St. Augustine and people like that. I think that is to me, that's a very attractive way of education. It's kind of something that I was trying to institute when I was the academic principal of a Qingdao, a Manao school, Qingdao, too.
Well, right. Even other great works of literature, Shakespeare. I mean, Hamlet deals with really great moral
But there's so many dead
questions.
white males, so many dead white males, and that's how we got away from the great work, the great books, because we got away from the great thinkers because they were dead white males.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they weren't dead when they wrote, but
No, but
but they are now.
I mean, really, that started in the 80s. The dead white male phrase, they started tossing that around. And so what we're seeing now is what has grown out of that. I first heard the definition of racism that posited that Black people cannot be racists. It's impossible for them to be racist because they have no power. I first heard that in like 1989 at a white, mostly white, and they were really messing up their own efforts at diversity in this liberal seminary. There was all kinds of rancor. There was all kinds of divisiveness over whether the Black voices were being heard enough, and these were the most liberal, some of the most liberal people in the church where I was working.
What denomination was it?
It was the American Baptist Churches of the USA and Canada, ABC. And I know they would chafe. They would say, "Oh no, we're not that liberal." They're that liberal, okay? They, when the New Testament prof has a huge, and I mean huge, portrait of Rudolf Bultmann over his desk, that's liberal. I'm sorry, I don't. If those are the people you're promoting, you're not just in the kind of moderate evangelical zone anymore.
Right.
So, and so they would say, "Yeah, we're kind of moderate evangelicals." No, you're not. So, anyways, there was all kinds of turmoil and uproar, even as they were trying to apply these definitions back then. And Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack the ink was still drying on those pages at the time, but they had already done a lot of the foundation laying by then.
Damn, that's right.
Well, and now the turn of the screw is towards Asian American lives matter, which for me, having lived most of my life in Asia, or most of my adult life either in Asia or among Asian Americans, including my kids, to me it's so boring. Boring.
I adopted, my wife and I adopted a child from South Korea, and this week is the first time I've been fearful for him. Now, of course, he lives in Florida. That's a big plus. If he lived in New York, I would say we're moving. It's dangerous to be Asian in some parts of the country right now. And it has nothing to do with calling the virus the Wuhan virus. Nothing.
Oh, of course not. But it's such a trivialization of deep issues. I mean, talking about dead white male authors. Now, who cares what color the skin of a person is when you're reading their book and it's a great book?
Well,
Right.
you're right. It's because this is what they're going to. I'm just going to play their advocate. It's because you're white that you feel that way. You don't know what it's like to be oppressed.
I've lived most of my life in non-white cultures. I hardly even know any white people. You're the first white people I've met in 30 years. So let me tell you.
And what they're going to say to you then is you're just trying to show off your credentials. I've been there.
No, but the problem with these people is they don't understand culture and they don't care about culture. I understand culture and I love culture. I love that
they literally have an answer for everything. It's a stupid answer, but they. This when you get out there, you better be ready. These are rough and tumble people. They will try to cut your throat rhetorically.
Oh, sure. I'm actually writing another book right now called "The Case for Aslan." What's the subtitle? Finding Evidence for Jesus in the Land of Narnia. And the chapter I was working on yesterday, and actually working on today, is I'm setting a struggle session against C.S. Lewis and Chaz in Seattle. And there's 4 people on the panel who are deciding whether or not to cancel Narnia. One of them is Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi.
I got to read this.
Philip Pullman and J.K. Rowling.
This is going to be good. Please keep it.
So I'm trying to figure out what to do with it's actually it's Diggory Kirk who's going to be the person who's representing.
As soon as you said struggle section, you caught me, because that's what Twitter has become in many corners of Twitter. It's a struggle session.
I never taken Twitter. Yeah. What was the point? We had a point here somewhere. What were we talking about?
Dead white males.
Dead white males. Yes. Here's the thing. And I actually kind of agree, because the person who wrote the chapter on this subject in the Third Education Revolution emphasizes Western literature. And I've actually proposed starting a school which would focus things slightly differently, because I do believe that it's important to read Western literature, because Western literature has changed the world. You can't get away from that. And it's great literature. But at the same time, I think, coming from an East Asian perspective, I would like to be inclusive, if you will. Mm-hmm. I would certainly want to include a little bit of, Confucius, a little bit of some of the Tang poets and Zhuangzi and some of those other people from the Chinese perspective, and maybe a few Indian writers and, a few African or other writers. Although my curriculum would be more, a little bit too old for some of the post-colonial materials. So I definitely agree that there should be different perspectives coming from different cultures, and it enriches our lives. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. I have mentioned it's a little different, but it's kind of along the same theme. When I was younger, and because I actually was younger, and I would go down, say, to Chicago.
That's usually the direction it goes, isn't it?
It often is that way, yeah. And I would
that's another chapter in my new book, by the way. The stone table cracks, and why entropy is not the last word. Anyway, go ahead.
What I loved about Chicago back in the day is you would drive through the neighborhoods. You would have an Italian neighborhood, a Polish neighborhood, a Ukrainian neighborhood, a Chinese. Pardon?
Now you're going way back.
I know. But and each one of them had their own, shopping areas and cultures and banks. But there was one thing they all shared, everyone, they were Americans. Right. So they didn't give up their culture. In fact, you became enriched because they maintained their culture. We're becoming homogenized now in a sense that there is no culture.
Cultural amnesia. And, when you talked about how your curriculum would not include the post-colonial writers, I don't know if you can really understand the post-colonial writers, what they're sometimes reacting against, until you read what came before them.
Right.
Including the white authors.
I'm a little bit like
Tolkien. We're running over time here, and I know you have something to get to.
I want to hear what he had to say. We're a little like Tolkien.
Okay.
Well, maybe we should, if we just have a couple minutes left, maybe we should go back to the book a little bit. I don't want to People may have questions about our program. Anything else about
Well,
that?
yeah, they are going to, but we're going to do more on this as time goes on. I have a conference I have to get through, but I want to revisit this in May with Vishal for sure, if I can have him get on here, and maybe him and you. Because I really believe, I don't know when the release date is my guess would be a month away at least, because you have a lot of stuff you're working on. But the name of the book is The Third Education Revolution. And I would suggest any and all, especially pastors and elders who are interested in passing on the faith through not only sound biblical teaching, but training their children to be able to think and understand culture and all those kinds of issues, should get engaged in this. Because you're not saying every church should have a church school. As I read this, what you're saying is you have, Ron uses this richness of resources or something.
Embarrassment of riches.
An embarrassment of, yeah. We have that in people. We have people who can do education at a local level, and the churches could facilitate that. Is that what you're looking for?
I think one of the most exciting things about this book is the international character of the contributors. You know, we have bishops in Uganda, and we have tech people from India, and we have people, you know, who have all kinds of different founding school in Canada, and people have all kinds of different interesting backgrounds and perspectives. And Vishal did a very good job of getting people to contribute who you know, complement one another. It really, I think, comes together well in that sense. A very coherent program for Christian reform, something that really needs our attention right now.
It really does, and I think it'll be strengthening for the church, because one of the things that I have noticed over time is when you become passionate and engaged with something, you are really willing to get involved and help others become passionate and engaged as well. Education is not something you just send your kids off to school for. It is something as parents you need to be engaged with. And if you're a Christian, you need to be engaged in such a way that you are not just passing on intellectual information, but passing on the faith, passing on the ability to reason and think, passing on the strength of character to live in a adversarial culture. That is key, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely.
What you're proposing. So, all right. And with that, I want to ask Ron to walk us out of here. We're definitely going to have you back on, and Vishal hopefully as well.
Yeah, I would really like that. Okay, so let's give credit to where credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil. Before me, our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami, and our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. Original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never, never. And to everyone who is watching live, we will see you next week. For those who are watching you by Memorex, if you remember that, you can tune in at any time, and do let us know if what we're doing is helpful to you. So, and with that, say goodbye.
Hasta la vista, baby.